Hello everyone, my name is Gea Destiana and I'm here to explain and share about Japan culture and social issue. So let's jump into our first topic, discrimination. In Japan, discrimination against foreigners is quite known. For example, there's this case of foreigners trying to find a place to, not a place to live. I think it's just a place to rent for staying a while they're in Japan. The landlords doesn't allow the foreigners to stay in their rental home because the landlord's afraid that there will be a communications issue where if they were faced with problems they cannot the landlord's afraid that they cannot solve it nicely since they have a different language, they speak a different language. That's why the landlords is denying the foreigners, not accepting the foreigners to rent their place. So let's get into our topic. Racism in Japan comprises negative attitudes and views on race or ethnicity which are related to each other, are held by various people and groups in Japan, and have been reflected in discriminatory laws, practices, and actions, including violence, at various times in the history of Japan against racial or ethnic groups. Japan lacks any law which prohibits racial, ethnic, or religious discrimination. The country also has no national human rights institutions. Non-Japanese individuals in Japan often face human rights violations that Japanese citizens may not. In recent years, non-Japanese media has reported that Japanese firms frequently confiscate the passports of guest workers in Japan, particularly unskilled laborers. So yeah, I guess since Japan is a quite famous country to visit for the foreigners, I feel like Japan have to change a couple of their system and trying to acknowledge their people, their citizens, to to I don't know if I could say this, but I feel like they should be more accepting to the fact that they are a famous country, um, that every foreigners that travels must have Japan on their travel list. So yeah, I feel like since Japan is a quite famous country to visit, I feel like Japan have to acknowledge their citizens. Okay, let's move on to our next topic. This still, I think it's still in the umbrella under the discrimination, and it's case system. So, the lowest of the outcasts are the eta, or translated to an abundance of filth. In the past, when one commits a crime, it's punishable by death by samurai members. The eta were exempt from many aspects, including the social laws of the land. Records dating back to the 19th century indicate that one eta is worth 1/7 of an ordinary person. The term eta is similar to a slur, with an offensive meaning, but is still in use today. Even though the caste system was abolished in 1871 during the Meiji Restoration, alongside the feudal system, many burakumin, or as they are also known, untouchables, still find it difficult to fully integrate into society. Burakumin communities are still rampant throughout Japan. To a foreigner, a burakumin might not be so easily distinguishable. In fact, there is no genetic difference between a burakumin and a normal person. Nevertheless, even if they can blend in among the crowd, their identity alone carries a lot of social stigmas. So the discrimination started as a form of barrier that regular citizens put up to distance themselves from employments deemed unclean, killing animals to make leather, but mostly the dirtiest of all jobs, executioners. So I guess burakumin is what they called a bunch of executioner, so that's why the citizens trying to put a distance to themselves, because they don't want to get, they don't want themselves to get dirty. They don't want to other people to look at them like because they close with Burakumin. So despite the effort from the association to dispel the perception of those people as sub-citizens, how they were viewed in the past, the long shadow of centuries of discrimination is still felt to this day. Because of the stigma attached to them, the Burakumin is looked down upon in every aspect of society, whether it's at work or in their personal lives. Those who hold Buraku ancestry are seen as a disgrace or even unsuitable for marriage. When their ancestry comes to light, they might suffer from discrimination, which in extreme circumstances include things like receiving hate mail. Finding a job might also be difficult, as employers will screen out applicants thoroughly, but this stigma is not just placed upon the Burakumin, but even people who have any form of association with them. So I guess that's why other citizens trying to put a distance to themselves, as I was saying previously. They just trying to because the stigma of Burakumin, other people, they don't want to get any closer with Burakumin, because even though you are close with them, the other citizens are going to look down upon you, because since you are close with Burakumin, and they're going to they thought that you are one of them. So that's why. So let's move on to our next topic: feminism and gender equality. Feminism in Japan began with women's rights movements that date back to antiquity. The movement started to gain momentum after Western thinking was brought into Japan during the Meiji Restoration in 1868. Japanese feminism differs from Western feminism in the sense that less emphasis is on individual autonomy. Prior to the late 19th century, Japanese women were bound by the traditional patriarchal system where senior male members of the family maintained their authority in the household. After the reforms brought by Meiji Restoration, the status of women in Japanese society also went through a series of changes. Trafficking in women was restricted. Women were allowed to request divorces, and both boys and girls were required to receive an education. Further changes to the status of women came about in the aftermath of World War II. Women received the right to vote, and a section of the new constitution drafted in 1946 was dedicated to guarantee gender equality. So there's this in 1970, in the wake of the anti-Vietnam War movements, a new women's liberation movement called Woman Ribo, or Woman Lead, emerged in Japan from the New Left and radical student movements in the late 1960s. This movement was in sync with radical feminist movements in the United States and elsewhere, catalyzing a resurgence of feminist activism through the 1970s and beyond. The activists forwarded a comprehensive critique of the male-dominated nature of modern Japan, arguing for a fundamental change of the political, economic system and culture of the society. What distinguished them from previous feminist movement was their emphasis on sexual liberation, or sei no kaiho. They did not aim for equality with men, but rather focused on the fact that men should also be liberated from the oppressive aspect of a patriarchal and capitalist system. So there's this bunch of women group that called the Red Wave, or Seki Rankai, was the first socialist women's association. Yamakawaki, Kue, and others organized this association in April 1921. The Red Wave's manifesto condemned capitalism, arguing that it turned women into slaves and prostitutes. Rural families were forced to contract their daughters to factories due to financial difficulties. So these rural families, they sell their daughters because they found economical difficulties or something like that. So these girls were required to live in dormitories, unable to live except to go to work. and they work 12-hour shifts in poor conditions. So why Japan can't shake sexism? So this is a quite recent case about Yoshiro Mori. Yoshiro Mori is the head of the Tokyo Olympics organizing committee, has resigned after he was criticized for making inappropriate remarks about women. He quoted as saying women talk too much and that meetings with many female board directors would take a lot of time. The resignation comes as pressure mounted on him over the past week. Major sponsors came forward to criticize his comments, including Toyota, one of the biggest Olympics backers. The move was seen as something of a victory for women, but Nojo, who is the head of a youth group called No Youth No Japan, says Mori's resignation doesn't come close to tackling the overall problem of gender inequality in Japan. Companies criticize Mr. Mori's comments, but some of them have less than 1% female board members, and that needs to change, she says. The topic of gender equality keeps making headlines in Japan for all the wrong reasons. Indeed, just a few days after Mori resigned, the ruling party hit the news again by announcing that while it was willing to allow women to spend its all-male board meetings, they will not be allowed to speak. So one key factor is the way traditional gender roles still prevail, significantly reducing the pipeline of women into leadership positions. Historically, after World War II, the combination of a hard-working husband who devotes his life to his company and a stay-at-home mother was encouraged, explains Hiroki Komazaki, founder and CEO of Florence, a non-profit organization which advocates for solutions that help working parents. This encouragement has led to a norm which husbands work very long hours while housework and childrearing still fall mainly on wives. The government latest national survey in 2020 show mothers still do 3.6 times more housework than fathers. Because of these norms, as well as hiring biases in some companies and the change-resistant working culture, many women stop working after having children or optional for part-time or contract work that generally does not lead to any promotions. These entrenched divisions of labor has impacted population growth. Some women faced with the prospect of giving up work or stepping off the career track when they have children or having fewer children, none at all. So that's why Japan's birth rate decreasing, because yes, their woman decided to not have children, and I think they're just trying to enjoy their life and chasing their careers or something like that. So it's this Japan's birth rate is currently at a record low. Its marriage rate is also plummeting. One factor there is that men worry they can't support family on just their salary. So let's move on to our last topic, pop culture. So I'm going to share about there's two pop culture, which is anime and Japanese fashion. First one is anime. Anime is hand-drawn and computer-generated animation originating from Japan. Outside of Japan and in English, anime refers specifically to animation produced in Japan. However, in Japan and in Japanese, anime, a term derived from a shortening of the English of animation, describes all animated works regardless of style or origin. Animation produced outside of Japan with similar style to Japanese animation is commonly referred to as anime-influenced animation. Anime is a diverse medium with distinctive production methods that have adapted in response to emergent technologies. It combines graphic art, characterization, cinematography, and other forms of imaginative and individualistic techniques. Compared to Western animation, anime production generally focus less on movement and more on the detail of settings and use of camera effects such as panning, zooming, and angle shots. Diverse art styles are used and character proportions and features can be quite varied, with the common characteristic feature being large and emotive eyes. So just like any other animation in the past, they have to hand drawn first, just like the Western one. So in the 1940s, Japan premiered the first animated film, which was sponsored by the government. When the war ended, over the years, the manga, Japanese comics, were distributed to the population. They served as a distraction from the harsh realities that Japanese people had to face after the war. So usually there's the first one who will get released is the manga, right? So after the manga is getting popular and getting recognition from the animation studio, so yeah, so when the manga get recognition from the animation studio, they're going to animate it. So that's when anime is created. One creator in particular deserves a special mention. In the 1960s, Osamu Tezuka created the first modern anime called Astro Boy. And from then on, many writers and producers followed his example. And by the time the 80s rolled around, Japan had many anime titles to export. Little by little, the influence of Japanese anime spread throughout the world. Today, titles as such Pokemon or Neon Genesis Evangelion are part of the imagination of a large part of the world's population. So yeah, anime is one of the popular culture from Japan, since they already globalized, and they are all over the world. So yeah, you can find any type of anime that you like and any genre. So the second one, Japanese fashion. So there's two Japanese term fashion that I'm going to share with you today. So the first one is Lolita. What is Lolita fashion? It is a street fashion originating from Japan in the 1970s, typically associated with the Harajuku neighborhood in Tokyo. The fashion has evolved and changed over time, but continues to be a celebration of femininity, modesty, cuteness, and beauty that does not fit into mainstream fashion trends. As a style, Lolita is different from other Japanese girl-centric street fashions because it draws from Western history, fairy tale, and children's literature, creating a unique sense of cute. In addition, there is a focus on new clothes by Japanese designers, as opposed to styling with vintage clothing from abroad. Nowadays, you can find Lolitas or people who wear Lolita fashions in many major cities around the world. The rise of Lolita fashion has been closely linked to the popularity of visual kei, a Japanese music genre derived from glam rock, metal, and punk. Androgynous male musicians perform in elaborate costumes that draw on multiple historical references, most notably Rococo and Victoriana, while fans make outfits in imitation of their favorite musicians to wear at concerts. Wearing Lolita is not a form of cosplay or costume play, the act of dressing up as anime or manga characters, but an emphatic statement, or even a hallway life that expresses the identity of its devotees. So the next one, this is the last one, Gyaru. Gyaru is a Japanese fashion subculture. The term Gyaru is a Japanese transliteration of the English slang word gal. The term for Gyaru was introduced in Japan by the American jeans company Lee, who introduced a new line of jeans to their brand Wrangler. When the women's jeans line Gals was released in the 1970s, the term had been quickly used outside of its original branding and was adopted to describe the Gyaru fashion in 1972. Gyaru subculture was its peak during the Heisei era. It had a large influence on Japanese fashion and its economy, its international economy, and its global soft power across the world through Cool Japan, such as in Southeast Asia and internationally. By the early 2010s, Gyaru fashion was typically characterized by tan skin, as it is considered a must in some sub-styles. They were also most of them often see with highly elongated and decorated artificial nails. As for the appearances of a Gyaru, dramatic makeup is considered to be essential as well in this fashion subculture, or depending on which sub-style one partakes in it. It is a fashion subculture that is considered to be non-conformist or rebelling against the Japanese standards of the society and the beauty at the time, when women are expected to be housewives and fit the Asian beauty standards of pale skin and dark hair. You have to be cute and all. So yeah, Gyaru is at first I thought Gyaru is Asian people trying to imitate white people or Western people, but I think Gyaru is a different kind of genre from there. So yeah, I think that's all that I can share with you about culture in Japan and their social issues. And thank you so much for paying attention. Thank you so much for staying with me. Goodbye.